What is going on, everybody? Happy Friday. BobbyFi here, flying solo. We're going to be talking through this NBA 7-game slate. We just got some more news in just a few minutes ago about actually, it wasn't even, I guess it was a little bit while ago, but I don't think we've updated the projections yet on LaMelo and Brandon Miller being ruled out. My guess is we're going to see the same thing with Micic looking like a better play and all that. But I'm going to go through FanDuel first to go game by game, but I'm going to skip that game and we'll save it for last just because we're waiting for stuff to update. And then I'm going to go over to the DraftKings and talk about what's a little bit different over there. Trying to do things a little bit of a different order because I already did a DraftKings preview a little bit earlier. But please hit the like button and all that stuff. We should have things back to normal. Be back home on the 7th, and Sheets should be back then around then as well. And we'll get things back cruising in the normal way. But right now, it's no screens, just going through what we've got on this slate so far. So appreciate you guys joining us. All right, talking through FanDuel real quick. So a couple things that are different. Keon Ellis looks like a better play over here. Asar Thompson's pretty much a lock for me on both. Not a lock, but close to a lock on both sites. I'm just going to go game by game, though. Again, skip the first one. We'll go about it that way. Like I said earlier, I am not playing KCP on this slate. You're not going to get me to do it. I don't care if he had a good game the last time out. If you ended up with a little bit of him, if you're playing 150, no problem with it, but absolutely not something I'm looking to do. The only one who I have any interest in on FanDuel from this Orlando side is Jalen Suggs. And I think that's really the only play I can talk myself into. Not that interested in this game. There's a lot of other games I like better. It is a good matchup, but for me, I'm just not finding the need to get to a whole lot of it. So that's sort of where I'm at with the Orlando side. Toronto, again, quickly, as I mentioned earlier today, totally fine. Fine if you want to take a shot on Podol, but nobody who I consider anywhere near a priority. And just not all that interested in that game in general. Still waiting on news on Porzingis and Jaylen Brown, and also the Celtics. You never know on a back-to-back; they could end up sitting somebody else. But it is a good game, a good tough game against Houston. And nothing makes sense from a projection standpoint. I would have to, we'd have to see what happens with Porzingis and Jaylen Brown before really deciding anything over there. It looks like Anthony Black was just ruled out, so that might change a little bit on Orlando, but I don't think it's going to make as big of a difference. We'll see. Maybe that brings some other things into play, but I'll take a look and see what the projections say in just a little bit. On the Houston side, on Orlando, Jalen Green's the only one I have a major interest in. I don't mind Jalen Green or Van Vliet. I'm not going to do the Dillon Brooks thing today. I think there's other value that I'd rather get to, but I certainly am not going to fault you for it. It's just not where I'm headed myself. And fire in any questions or thoughts as we go along here, because there's not a whole lot to I'm just going to run through my stuff and then take a look at the chat after I go through the games, but happy to answer anything, happy to go through anything with you guys. Not getting to anything on the Knicks currently. Don't mind if you want to take a shot on Jalen Brunson, but again, questionable still along with McBride, so have to wait on that to see what we want to do, but probably still not getting to much from the Knicks, at least as things stand right now. And you're going to hear me say that about a lot. I feel like I'm making this slate very, very small for me. I obviously can't play down here in Mexico, but that's the way I would treat it, no matter what I was playing. OKC, never mind a shot on Shai Gilgeous-Alexander as a slightly lower owned option. Looks like some of the projections are updating as we speak, but nothing really on OKC that stands out for me. And you're going to hear me say this again in this next game because I don't like much from Washington. If you wanted to double Champagny it up tonight, no problem with that. I prefer the other Champagny, but personally not getting to anything on Washington side myself. If I did, it would probably just be Champagny or maybe a thinner play on FanDuel than DraftKings for Joe Val. On the New Orleans side, I think that, like I mentioned earlier, I liked Missy quite a bit. I think he's an interesting way to go at center. He and Joe Val, I think, are the only two plays in this game that I would actually try to go out of my way to maybe get any exposure of. And I don't mind the DeJounte Murray play, especially on FanDuel, not getting too much of it on DraftKings as of right now. Moving over to Cleveland and Dallas. On the Cleveland side, Struss looks like a little bit of a better play on DraftKings. I still don't think you need to do it. I think there's other ways to go on this slate, so I'm personally not getting too much of it, but I'm not going to fault anybody for getting there. Kyrie is out, as we know, and we'll get to the other side of this in a minute. Even with Kyrie out, it's really Dinwiddie. He's 6,600 on DraftKings, so it's a little bit of a play that makes more sense to me on FanDuel. Certainly don't mind Dinwiddie, Klay Thompson. Those would be my two favorites. And then PJ Washington, I think, is going to end up lower owned on DraftKings, but I like the PJ Washington play a little bit. So all three of those guys are heavily in play for me. I do think that on FanDuel, I would make Dinwiddie a little bit of a priority. So he's the only one that falls in the priority category. And if you want to take a shot on Jaden Hardy, I think that's completely viable. This is the kind of game where you could just see him getting hot and staying on the court quite a bit. So One of Dinwiddie or Hardy would be my favorites, followed by Clay, and then PJ Washington. But if we do think Washington's going to be a little lower owned, which I think he will be on DraftKings, I certainly don't mind that taking a shot there. I really like Wembanyama tonight. It's on FanDuel, you got power forward eligibility, so you could actually play him and Jokic if you wanted to go thin elsewhere. But both Vassell and Chris Paul are showing up. I'm not that interested in Chris Paul, but I am interested in Vassell, and I'm very interested in Champagnie. I prefer Julian to Justin Champagnie, as I mentioned earlier, and I do have Champagnie as a priority play, and I think Vassell would be pretty close for me to a priority play. So I'm going to click him for right now. I think this is a good game. Obviously, if there's one game I wanted to watch tonight, this would be the game for me. And the slate's a little bit different on DraftKings. We do have the later games, so maybe it's a little bit thinner, but I still like the Vassell play and the Champagnie quite a bit. Love Jokic tonight. He's a little more expensive on FanDuel. I prefer him on DraftKings at 12.2 versus 13,000 on DraftKings on FanDuel. But obviously, there's no problem with it either side. And I like Westbrook, but neither of them quite make the priority list for me. Although I would go out of my way, I probably would want to be at least with the field if I was in my multi-entry tournaments. Memphis in Sacramento. Jalen Wells is showing up for a lot of people. I guess I get it, but I'm not as high on it as everybody else is. And the one who I'm the most interested in, probably from the Memphis side, would be Desmond Bane. And we still are waiting on news. Obviously, Edey, Laravia. The idea of delaying and then late swapping makes a lot of sense on this slate to me, because I'm not as interested in some of the earlier stuff. And again, I'll revisit the Charlotte stuff in a minute because we're still waiting for those projections to update. But if you wanted to play Jalen Wells, you're always going to have opportunities to switch off of it. It's fine, but remember, they play a bunch of guys. We still don't know who's in. So it's a little bit of a up in the air situation for Memphis as far as I'm concerned. Sacramento, love Keon Ellis. I think he's a priority on FanDuel, getting a lot of minutes. I'm happy that they're letting him play a little bit more. I think Malik Monk is a really solid play. There's a lot of those similar Vassell Monk type plays on actually on both sites, but definitely am fine with Malik Monk, and didn't quite make the priority for me, but I do love Keon Ellis as a value play. Prefer that to the Jalen Wells of the world. And everybody is sort of priced just about right. It's a good pace up game, should be high scoring. So if you wanted to go over the top and play a little bit more from this game, I'm certainly not going to fault you for that, because that does make a lot of sense with that big giant 240 total. Atlanta and the Lakers, nothing I can get to from Atlanta as of right now. Just, again, Trey's questionable, Jalen Johnson's questionable, Bogdanovich questionable. The slate might look totally different in, an hour after lock than it does right now. So, again, late, forcing some of the late stuff in may make some sense just for that reason alone. And as I mentioned, there are more games on FanDuel than there are on DraftKings today. On the Lakers side, Anthony Davis and LeBron both probable. I think that I prefer the Davis side of things, but again, I think I like Wemby a little bit more than I do Davis. And Wemby's 11.8 on FanDuel, Davis is 11.5. I don't think there's anything wrong with either of them. It's a good matchup, but I'm finding myself with a little bit more interest in Wemby than I am in Anthony Davis. And LeBron's price is completely reasonable. Maybe you don't do it on the back-to-back after the big game anyway. I'm not quite as high on LeBron. I'm going to jump over to DraftKings because I spent a little more time over here and just take a quick look into chat real quick. I do want to figure out why we're not getting to any of the Kyrie, and I'll jump back to the Charlotte side of things. Let me just see real quick if we've updated. It doesn't look like it's been updated yet, so I'm gonna go through DraftKings and just see what's different real quick over here. We'll get into that in just a minute. Charlotte, obviously, Detroit's got a lot of the priority plays for me. Both Asar Thompson at 4,000, Tobias Harris at 4,900 on DK, I think are awesome plays. I don't mind Beef Stew as a long shot, but it just feels like maybe not quite the right slate. I do like a lot of the centers on DraftKings, so maybe not the right slate for it, but 3,400 certainly a reasonable price to take a shot at a guy just because who plays minutes, and he definitely has upside in this matchup. Orlando, again, not getting to anything on DraftKings. I am not doing the Kentavious Caldwell-Pope thing. I only do it if he's like sub 5% owned in general. It just doesn't make sense to me when there's other value out there better. I understand that he had a game the other night that you needed him, whatever. I get willing to let those games go. They're less common than you'd want for this kind of a slate. There's plenty of good plays, so I'm just not doing it personally. Quickly is the only one I have interested in on the Toronto side. And I mentioned you could take a shot on Podol, but center I think is fairly strong on DraftKings. I really like the spend ups with especially Jokic and Wemby. But if you wanted to do that, I think that's totally reasonable. On the Boston side, again, we need to know about Kristaps and Jaylen Brown. And if they decide randomly to sit someone else, it wouldn't surprise me on a back-to-back. But that's just where I'm at right now. On the Houston side of things, again, it would be only Whitmore, but I think that's a little bit thin for me. So Whitmore's fine, but I like some other plays a little bit better. I like the Asar Thompson play better, and he's the same price basically. Nothing from the Knicks currently, but if Jaylen Brown or Miles McBride are out, I'm sorry, actually, it would really only be if Jalen Brunson was out also. If Brunson's out and McBride's in, definitely interested in McBride. If Jalen Brunson's in, I think that he's worth taking a shot on in large field stuff. He's a low-owned option that you could certainly, you could probably get your 50 plus from him. I just prefer other spend ups on this slate to him. On the OKC side of things, again, not getting to anything on either site, really. It's not a great pace matchup for either of these teams. Should be a good real-life game. Both the Knicks and OKC and the San Antonio-Denver game are fun games to watch, but not getting too much from this game from a DFS perspective. Washington, Joe Val is a little more interesting on DraftKings than he is on FanDuel, as I mentioned, 5,100, completely reasonable. I'm not doing the Justin Champagny thing. I am doing the Julian Champagny thing. That's where I'm at today. On the New Orleans side, we've got Missy, who I really like, and I think that I prefer that play slightly over Joe Val, but it's pretty close between those two for me on DraftKings. But both are reasonable, and there are a lot of ways to go at center. I still like the Trey Murphy idea, too. I think Trey Murphy, you just play for the upside. Great pace matchup for them. I think that's probably my favorite play on New Orleans outside of Missy, who, again, you may not be able to get in just because there's other good center options. Max Struss, completely reasonable, almost a priority on at 4K. Still prefer Asar Thompson, but you can play both of them, and you have plenty of room to spend up if you do so. No issue with anybody else, but certainly nobody who's a priority. And then Dallas, I thought you could sort of think some guys would project a little bit better. As I mentioned now about FanDuel, Klay Thompson and PJ Washington are both interesting to me. I'm not going to set as a core play for Dinwiddie on DraftKings just because it doesn't quite make sense at 6,600. But I do think he's a totally reasonable play at 6,600. And I think it's worth speculating on Jaden Hardy. We know that you might get your 12 fantasy point game, but this guy has 40 plus upside. And whether it's a blowout or not, I think Hardy will give himself an opportunity to have minutes. So he's an off the board, value that I think is certainly reasonable. I'm kind of surprised he's not getting more ownership. I wonder if that's going to update a little bit closer to lock, and we might get some more ownership. I don't think he'll be only 5% owned, especially in the higher buy-ins. I think he's worth gambling on if you think he's going to be anywhere, even 10% or less. I think he's a very reasonable value play to take a shot on. Love both Wemby and Jokic tonight, as I mentioned earlier. Champagny to 3,900, another priority. You've got a lot of these 4K plays that are just going to make it easy to open other things up. If you don't play Champagny, I would try to go one of Champagny or Keldon Johnson. Also really like Stephon Castle tonight and Vassell. So along with Wemby. So there's a lot of Spurs that are showing up for me right now. I think you wouldn't want to play more than 3, but I think that you would want to play at least 1. So I would actually set my Spurs exposure to 1 to 3. I don't know if I'd want to go any higher than that, but I do really like the Spurs side of things, especially on DraftKings, because we don't have as many games as we do on FanDuel. And it looks like the projections are updating. We'll see what that means in a minute. And then we'll talk about some overall stuff in just a minute. On the Denver side of things, as I mentioned, really like Jokic, really like Westbrook on DraftKings, and I like Strawther as another value. I don't like Strawther quite as much as the 3,900 and the 4K plays that we spoke about, but I do think he's an interesting guy to take a shot on at just a very reasonable price, getting more minutes. And if you wanted to play a little bit of a low-owned guy, if you're playing 150 or if you're playing even 50 lineups, I would try to get to a little bit of Peyton Watson, who I think has some upside in this matchup as well. That's my overall outlook. Any questions or thoughts from you guys? Happy to answer them. I can't run any builds because I'm not able to play down here, so I'm not going to be able to do that. But I do want to encourage everyone. This is a great late swapping slate, and there's going to be a lot of guys out who we haven't even, we haven't figured it out yet because there's just so many Q tags on the board. And this time of year, until about like the 10th of January, it feels like we get a ton of guys sitting. And even then, after that, it's been one of those years in the NBA where just you have a ton of just late news and a bunch of guys sitting games that we just haven't seen. Every year it's increasing, and I would love it if the NBA would do something about it, because it's really made it frustrating to play from a DFS perspective. You really have to be at your computer all the time. You have to maximize your late swap opportunities, which is partly why I'm so happy us at True DFS we're partnered with SaberSim, who just the late swap options, the late swapping is just, it's the best way to go. Look at Sheets the other night, took down the big one. Shout out to Sheets, who's on his vacation as well. And if there's nothing else, guys, that's sort of where I'm at on this slate. I will revisit the Charlotte game because we should have somewhat more updated projections on what's happening with them. My guess is you're going to see the same names that we've been seeing all year, and that's going to be probably without LaMelo. Yeah, I love Mark Williams, obviously a priority play. I already loved that play anyway. Love Bridges, but I think that Micic, I know he hasn't been as good, but I actually like the idea of getting some Micic here. I think there's enough upside for him against this Detroit team, where I know he's very frustrating. He just has them really, really bad games, all the time. But he's going to play the minutes. He's going to have the opportunity. 4,900 is maybe a little bit more than we'd want to spend, but I don't mind taking a shot on this kind of a play. I think Micic, 30 plus seems completely reasonable as a possibility in this matchup against Detroit. And that's sort of where I'm at on this slate. Again, the Charlotte Detroit game is the only early game that I have especially interest in, and then the last game, San Antonio and Denver. That's sort of my, along with Dallas, I guess the Dallas side of things. That's sort of the way I'm looking at the slate, is just playing the Charlotte Detroit, Dallas, and San Antonio Denver, with a couple of other pieces here and there, maybe something from New Orleans. Again, I mentioned I like Trey Murphy and Missy quite a bit. But that's pretty much all I've got. It's been tough down here because I'm at sea and we've got people walking in and out. So it's not been the best time for me to give the best possible content I can, but I did post my core plays. I will be in Discord. If anybody has any questions or thoughts, try and tag me and we'll do our best to answer any questions you have. And with that, guys, I'll say I appreciate all you guys being a part of everything, and we'll be there on the 7th. I did do a quick preview for the 2-game slate tomorrow, and then we'll be live Sunday before football. So keep an eye out for that. I'm going to see if I can get Rhodey to join me at 11 a.m. Eastern, or I guess, would it be late? 11 a.m. Eastern on Sunday. So I will probably not see you guys until then. Thanks for everything. Click a like button, hit the like button. We want to keep doing these videos for free, and it helps. Thanks so much for everything, guys, and we'll see you guys hopefully at the top of the leaderboards a little bit off later. Send some screenshots. We want to see some screenshots in the Discord.